An unsettling and deadly serious pattern today. A series of bomb threats against state capitals across this country, forcing mass evacuations, lockdowns, and delayed legislative sessions. Officials are investigating incidents at Capitol complexes in Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, Michigan, and Montana after each received threats seemingly within hours of each other. No evidence of explosives has been found. It's an alarming and apparent trend, with several local reports that the Connecticut state capitol, too, received its own bomb threat this morning. And of course, all in the wake of dire warnings by federal officials about a massive surge in threats against public servants at every single level of government. Joining our conversation, former FBI counterintelligence agent Peter Strzok. Tim and Mary, they are both back as well. Pete, there turned out to be no immediate threat at these state capitals, but talk about just the warning this serves in addition to everything else that led to this moment.
Sure. So I think this is an indication, unfortunately, of what we're going to see more of as time moves towards the election. I mean, look, people need to understand that regardless of whether or not anything turned up, that local, state, and federal law enforcement have to take this seriously. And so what that means is that FBI agents in Minneapolis and Detroit and Louisville and Jackson and New Haven and Atlanta all have to stop what they're doing because there aren't enough FBI agents and investigators to cover all the threats that are out there. It is a zero-sum exercise. So they have to stop what they're doing and look into these threats, if only to identify the fact that there is not a viable threat there. And what's particularly frustrating is, I think if you ask the two presumptive candidates for the President of the United States in 2024, are you willing to tell your supporters that violence is unacceptable? One of them would rapidly and absolutely say yes, without question. You should renounce all sort of violence or threats of violence. My worry is that if Donald Trump was asked that question, he would be unable to answer in the same way. And it's stunning to me. It's shocking. And unfortunately, that's what we're heading into with this presidential election cycle.
Right, Mary, I would layer something on to Peter's analysis. I like that he brings up this question of capacity, right? The fact that resources that should be focused on existing threats then get diverted. The fact that you're talking about a presidential candidate who cannot come out and condemn this type of violence, who's actually advocating for it. I would also argue there's the fact that it is intended to have a chilling effect, right? So let's look at who these went to. They went to the Secretary of State's office in Kentucky. They went to the Michigan State Capitol Commission. It is supposed to make the work of governance even harder.
That's right. And, you know, it's part of this trend that we've seen of threats against government officials. But this can be dangerous in whole new ways, because when you have to have an evacuation, when you have to have a law enforcement response, there's also the possibility, and this has happened in other types of swatting events, where someone could get killed because law enforcement are responding to something that could be a threat. There could be a shooting that happens accidentally. It could be blue on blue. It could be someone at the Capitol that thinks they need to defend themselves. And we see this in other circumstances, too. That's why this technique is also often used to swat. It's called swatting elected representatives.
We saw in Maine.
Frankly, of both parties, actually, it's happened. And sometimes then when the law enforcement shows up at the House, really bad things can happen because they come tearing in. We've also seen this, and we've seen white supremacist groups advocating and training for this, swatting synagogues during service, saying there's a bomb that's been planted, in the synagogue, knowing that that means law enforcement is going to descend upon that synagogue during the service, disrupt the service, throw people into panic. So in each one of these situations, it's intended to chill and intimidate, whether it's election officials like secretaries of state, state legislators, congressional legislators, or just, human beings in America practicing their faith. This is an alarming and growing, illegal conduct that really presents a threat of actual violence.
Right. Tim, it is alarming, and yet we all saw it coming. Attorney General Merrick Garland talked about the growing threats against public servants last fall. I want to play you some of that and talk about it on the other side.
We have had an astounding number of threats against public servants over the last several years. I think that when career public servants in the Justice Department and in election workers and airline crews, when they are singled out, this can lead to threats of violence and actual violence. We have the actual example of an attack on an FBI office by somebody who was incensed by political rhetoric. This does happen. We must not allow that to happen in this country.
Tim, maybe I have to imagine that as the lead investigator on the 1-6 committee, this makes you want to absolutely pull your hair out. The fact that part of what you tried to warn was that this was not the end. This was not in the rear view. This was very much on the horizon. The fact that it's happening in so many states, that it's happening at so many different levels of government. I would ask how we got here, but we know how we got here. We know who and what is the nexus of this political violence.
We do generally, Alicia, there's no question that rhetoric matters, that rhetoric about a deep state or about a system that is stacked against people is taken seriously and has consequences. I do think we have to be a little bit careful about these specific threats to state capitals. We don't know anything yet about who's responsible, what the motivation was. There are a lot of people in the world who, for whatever reason, are angry at government. So I just think with respect to these state capitals, it's a little early to tell. That said, there's no question, as the Attorney General eloquently put forth in that hearing, we are seeing in this country a very disturbing rise in threats against, attacks on people for doing their job. Every time the select committee for which I served met, they were brought to these meetings by Capitol police officers, because every single one of the 9 members of the select committee had a security detail because of threats they received simply for participating in an investigative fact-gathering process. It is an inevitable fact of life. You look at Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, right? These election workers that just raised their hand for public service. The fact that so many of them are personally targeted is really, really discouraging. And it reflects what I think is the fundamental divide in this country, and that is sort of distrust in institutions versus people that believe and support government, that believe and support media, science, higher education. There's this sort of fundamental breach between those that think that the system generally works for their benefit and people that really don't, people that are very cynical about the system. Unfortunately, that cynicism increasingly has taken the form not just of an opinion, but actionable threats and violence. And that's really, really discouraging.
Pete, I take Tim Heaphy's note of caution there to heart. It is echoed in Georgia. Gabriel Sterling, an elections official with the Office of the Secretary of State, posted this on social media, quote, "Do not jump to conclusions as to who is responsible. There will be chaos agents sowing discord for 2024. They want to increase tensions. Don't let them." Pete, your thoughts?
Well, that's absolutely right. And so is Tim. I mean, there are any number of actors, whether they're domestic actors. I am certain that Russian intelligence services and others in Iran and Cuba and perhaps elsewhere are looking at this and trying to understand how they can maximize the discord within the United States. But 2 points. One, that doesn't mean that law enforcement doesn't have to respond. So that does tax the system, the law enforcement system. It is putting stress on a group of people that already have too much to do on their plate. The other thing we're seeing that both Tim and Mary spoke to, there are a large number of people who are resigning from state boards of education, from local boards of education, walking away in Arizona, in Nevada, in Georgia, all across the United States, because they've seen this environment and they simply don't think it's worth the personal price and the price to the family. So this is not only something that is, kind of impacting the ability of law enforcement across the board to do its job. This is actually attacking and eroding the very voting infrastructure, state to state to state, at the most critical time. You know, one of the most important presidential elections of our lifetime, we have people who are walking away from wanting to work and participate in that process.